hopefully it will work this week. I'm trying a couple things new. I had some consistency problems last week with my live stream, so I'm kind of tweaking my settings a little bit here, hopefully to stumble upon a system that allows us to very, very quickly get what we need to do. All right, let's go over to renderography real fast and revisit what we're going to be doing this week. So today we're going to continue our conversation about painting hard surface objects inside of Photoshop. Okay, specifically we're going to extend our toolkit a little bit to explore. There we go. Last but certainly not least, we're going to extend our toolkit a little bit and start talking about the creation of bump maps. Because one of the things that we are running into right now is the surfaces of our objects not really having or producing that sense of realism, that relief. Okay, we're creating the illusion of little bumps and valleys, but when we look at how the light is shined across the surface of our dumpster, it still looks incredibly flat. Now we want to be able to go in and break up all that flatness with by creating the very large illusion of relief, surface relief. So bumps and valleys, peaks and valleys, excuse me, along the surface of our mesh. So we're going to talk about the bump map process today. We're going to go over the major kind of technological elements of bump mapping, and then we'll look at how we can take that technology and apply it to our texturing pipeline over in Photoshop. We still want to be able to control our bump maps, and that's the big underlying idea here, is that we want to be able to control where, specifically where within inside our texture file, we're creating little peaks and little valleys. The bump map system is really easy to kind of grab onto. The technology is pretty simple, but the application of that technology is where we want to focus our time and energy today. Okay? This week we're going to be doing two things, and you're going to have a lot of time in the lab today to work on both your homework and your lab assignment. I've developed two exercises for you today that will continue to focus all of our attention on painting. Okay? So your homework this week is to make a cool little blacksmith shop sign. Now I've already given you the shop sign. It's in the resources tab. It's a really cool little medieval-esque blacksmith shop sign. The whole idea behind this is that we start to build a little library of assets that we can use on our first level, which is coming up here very, very shortly, actually, as we start to walk closer and closer and closer towards the conclusion of this course. Does anyone know what week we're on right now? Week 8. This is week 8. Crazy, huh? Week 8. Week 8 of 16, so we're kind of halfway through this bad boy, which is extraordinarily exciting. So you're going to be doing a little blacksmith shop sign for your homework, okay? I've given you the model. Everything's UV'd. It's ready to rock and roll. You just need to make a whole series of texture files that accompany this model. This week's sole focus is on texturing, okay? That's going to be your homework. In your lab, I've given you, once again, another kind of neat texturing one. You're going to get some time in class today to work on this, and it's going to be this cool little science fiction panel. This sci-fi panel is already created. It's already UV'd. It's ready to rock and roll. We just need to focus your attention on creating a whole series of texture maps that will be mapped onto this object at the end. Okay? So that's what we're going to be doing this week. If you want, I would encourage you to go ahead and already download, or excuse me, to begin to download all of the assets. There's actually 3 things that I would like you to save for your personal library of learning materials. Of course, this is the model file for the blacksmith shop sign. We also have a model file for the sci-fi panel. And then there's a third. This is a PDF that I found online. And this directly tackles the art of hard surface texture painting inside of Photoshop. And it was such a phenomenal resource that I wanted to share with you. I didn't make it. I think it's beautifully illustrated, and it does a great job of outlining all the major steps in the approach that we would have when working with hard surface objects inside of Photoshop. So download it, save it to your own personal hard drive, keep it, and use it as a great reference for how to work inside this pipeline. And then, Roberto, this is for you. Okay. Whole series of videos that directly kind of tackle the technology in Photoshop that allows us to paint these bump and diffuse texture maps pretty quickly. Okay? Check it out. Good stuff. All right. We're going to start this week by just kind of revisiting our pipeline a little bit. And let me open up some stuff here. Here's the blacksmith shop sign. There it is. Very, very simple. Nothing too crazy here. And we want to spend our time talking about how we can approach the texturing phase of this, okay? Because one of the things that we have a hard time establishing in any texturing pipeline, of course, is the diffuse textures, but also the required illusion of surface relief, little bumps and scratches. Now, we don't want to go crazy with the bumps and scratches, right? Because the more detail that we have on the surface of our object, the more kind of muddy and incoherent our texture is going to read inside of our scene. So we've got to be careful with this. Same goes for the diffuse. We've got to be careful. We can't put too many scratches and too much dirt on there. We've got to be careful, all right? Just real quick, I forgot. I was going to mention this a moment ago. This is all ready to rock and roll. So if you go over to the UV tab and explore the UV map, everything's in there. It's ready to rock and roll. However, some interesting challenge in front of you, right? If you look at the way the UV maps are packed in there, you're going to have to go in and figure out how you want to approach the texturing pipeline here for this Blacksmith Shop sign. There are a number of different approaches. I'm going to let you and your current skill level demand and dictate how you're going to construct your UV island, okay? Now, ideally, you want to be able to get all of this into one, maybe two different texture files. Why would I say one or maybe two? Let's talk strategy here on UV island placement. Here they all are. Yeah. I like it. Overlap each side of the sign. And then you'll only have to make, they'll look at the same texture information. If you look at the back of the sign, we could run into a couple little issues here, as the surface geometry of the back of the sign is different from that of the front of the sign. So any sort of baking that we do, especially on the ambient occlusion, those shadow details are going to show up on the back. Could potentially be a big issue, okay? But it's not a bad place to start. We can save some pixels inside of our texture by overlapping the back and the front and kind of killing two birds with one stone. Interesting idea, okay? What other things should you be considering as you go through your decision-making process on how to pack all these UVs?
I guess because if you don't want to kind of mess up your video opaque, I find out what objects aren't overlapped by anything and are all the same material and try and get them on the same line.
I like it, okay. I think Mr. Dobbs' suggestion is a really good one. Start with the basic flushing out, if you will, of all the different materials within the scene. Now, if you look at this object, how many different materials would you say that we're going to have to craft? Probably 3, definitely 2, right? And when I say different materials, think globally, like wood, metal, ceramic, glass, things like that, okay? I think I'm going to have, of course, the base of my sign, this guy, is going to be 1. Okay, that's going to be one material because I want this entirely to be wood. And then these little brackets up here basically demand and dictate that we have metal. Of course, chain is going to be always metallic. And this is where you can start to stray a little bit here. So this is one. These things in here probably are all the same, although you could make them different, And then we have this little bracket that our guys are chilling on top of. Some choices here that you need to make. Are they going to be wood? Is it going to be metal? Use that decision as the driving determining factor as to how these are going to be packed inside of your texture. Okay. Once we kind of go through that process of in our minds, flushing out which objects in our texture are going to be which material, we have to create a priority list, right? Which is the most important part of this texture? The sign, right? Why? Why is the sign the most important?
That's what everyone's going to see.
Is everyone going to see? Why is everyone going to see the sign? It's a sign, but why? You got to give me why. This is, it's not, things don't look cool because you say they're cool,
The first thing they'll see.
But why?
Because that's what they want to know about.
Okay, I like it. What's often on the interior of a sign? Words, okay? I know this seems obvious. I know it seems elementary, but we gotta focus on what the gamer is going to see, right? This isn't just some random material whose details are only important to the subconscious. When we're working with elements that contain text, we have to be very careful to ensure that the textures we create makes that text legible. Okay? So the sign, priority item number 1 for this entire texture, is it not? That's the most important bit, is the sign itself. Everything else is secondary. So with that said, how are we going to pack all the UVs for the sign portion of this? Everyone's still on daylight saving, apparently. Yeah, absolutely. That's it. We want to make sure that the UV islands for the sign themselves are as large as we can make them inside of our positive UV quadrant, right? Which tool will automatically take those UV islands and fit them inside of our positive UV quadrant? Pack, okay. Okay. Now, define to me what pack ultimately does. In your experience with pack UVs, what does it do? Yeah.
It reorganizes the islands to fit without crossing over.
You got it. So it's going to take all the islands inside of your UV map, reorganize them in a very specific pattern, and ensure that that pattern does not include any sort of overlapping UVs, right? Is that what we want to start with initially? Negative. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. And this is the approach that I always have whenever I want to go in, or whenever I'm going in and packing my own UVs, okay? You have to zero in on the elements of your scene that are the most important, that we know the gamer is absolutely going to go see, and start from there. I'm going to use fit UVs. Fit UVs is fantastic, because what does it do? Well, duh, yeah, it's going to fit the UVs, but where is it going to fit the UVs? You got it. Okay. I'm going to isolate my scene by doing Shift-H. Here are the UV islands that have been created for your little wooden shield, okay, your wooden shop sign. Now check it out. You could, if you wanted to, you could go in, and I have both of them selected, and Fit UVs is right there. And check it out, keep proportion, definitely want to make sure that's on. Now it's going to try to do its best to take those elements and fit them inside the positive UV quadrant and make them as large as it possibly can. This is good. This is very good, right? We like this. We like this a lot, okay? Excuse me. Because now we know beyond any reasonable doubt that they're the largest they can be while having everything inside that positive UV quadrant. I like Fit UVs. I use Fit UVs a lot. Okay, it's one of my favorite kind of go-to tools because it allows me to move elements around inside of my UV map with accuracy. With that said, now everything else is going to be secondary. I'm just going to hide those. And here's a good idea. It looks like I gave you some really bad UVs for this guy. Here's all the chains. And this actually this is an older project file. Some of these errors in here may be stemming from the fact that I made this back in like 501. That's okay. We can easily remap those little errors. Yeah, the brackets look good for the most part. We just got a couple cross polys. Here, let's just fix them real fast. How would you approach fixing these two little cross jabbers? Yeah, give me a suggestion.
Just delete and see what happens.
I like just delete them and then maybe just re-UV map them, okay? I'm a big believer in making it as easy for me to construct these UVs as I possibly can. Sometimes it's easier just to delete the problem and re-UV map just those polygons than to try to figure out how to edit the existing UVs to make them work. Okay, with those UVs selected, you can see over in my viewport, it looks as though the little end cap there for a couple of these little brackets. Yeah, okay, no problemo. I can fix those real fast. Let's just delete those. Okay, and I'll just do a little Control-Shift-A action here, and we'll do Project from View. Boom. All right, and now we got to see which part of this it clips onto. Might be that top edge or that bottom edge. Let's do unselected here. Yeah, I got lucky. All right. Mission accomplished. Okay. So here's what I have so far. Take everything into account, except maybe minus the sign. Okay. We can go back in and fix that later. How would you approach the packing of all of these UV islands inside the positive UV quadrant to ensure that we're getting the best result and maximizing all the space? We don't want to have any empty pixels. So what are we to do here? We've established our priority object, which is the shield, the sign itself. What would you call the second most important element?
I was going to say you could rotate it sideways.
Yeah, absolutely. Those vertical UVs in the center of the grid, you can rotate those sideways, right? And that'll give you a lot of space. We clearly don't want them in the center. So we could do something like this. Rotate them 90 degrees, move them out of the way. I love it. Can even move them up here on the top. Take these guys, put them in here. You don't necessarily have to rely entirely on pack UVs to get the job done. Often just kind of going through the process and examining the content that you have first is going to be a big, big help. Let's see. I'm going to move all, oops, excuse me. I'm just going to take these, move them up a little bit to get myself some more room down here. And now I can focus a little bit more on this guy. So you're going to have to figure out how to unwrap this to get a good result. With the images that you have here, you can very easily unwrap this, put it inside your scene, and get ready to rock and roll. Okay? All of this can pack down into one texture. You should try to make all of this pack into one texture as much as you can. Why? Why do we want to get this all into one texture as best we can? Yeah?
Takes up less information.
You got it. It's less memory on the computer. Right. Okay? Start thinking about how the game engine is going to process all of this content. We can't have a very, very simple detail piece dominating a significant part of our memory in a computer game. This should only be one texture file, one set of UVs. We don't want to have multiple texture files because now we're taking up more memory to describe something that's relatively simple. Comment, questions? Okay.
Oh.
Yes, go ahead.
So unwrapping that, are you going to like use edge? Grab it by the edge and just like unwrap it?
You could, absolutely. I'll leave you guys with your unwrapping skills to figure out how to do this. But this is going to be part of your assignment this week. All right. I think for today, and just for me and for what we're going to be talking about over in Photoshop, we're going to leave this as is. And I'm actually going to delete these UVs so they're not accidentally sent. There we go. All right. Looking pretty cool. I like it. I like it a lot. Oh, here's a great little trick. A lot of people don't realize this inside of Modo, but you can do really high-quality preview renders of your object inside of every single OpenGL viewport in Modo. And I like it. It's called RayGL. I use it quite often, actually. A lot of folks, they forget about the little button inside your OpenGL viewport. It's right here in our interface, RayGL. I'm just going to turn it to full. And you can see that there's a full preview render. Well, it's not actually a full preview render. It's, I think it's a half-quality preview render of how this object is going to look if you were to render it right now. And I do this a lot just to see if all the planes and all the different surfaces within my object are looking the way I want to look. One other thing that I do quite frequently is I turn off my wireframes. Okay. Often, when you're doing these RayGL previews, the little gray wireframes of your models kind of gets in the way visually of your decision-making process of how things are looking. So if you hit the O key to bring open your viewport properties, under active meshes, we have this wireframe overlay setting. The default is set to colored. We're going to go to none, and it's going to turn off all the wireframes. And now we can very cleanly see what this object is going to look like without those wireframes going in and adjusting our decision-making process. I find that wireframes are a blessing and a curse. They're really great on the modeling side, but when we're evaluating how things are going to look, we want to turn them off. Because if you know, I find my brain having a hard time understanding the volume of things when we have certain lines that are straight, other lines that are not straight. You kind of create an optical illusion, if you will, inside the computer. Turning them off definitely helps. All right. Okay, things are looking very, very nice. I like this very much. So let's talk about how we can get this out of Modo and into Photoshop and continue our texture mapping pipeline. Okay. Let's turn off RayGL. Oh, full, or is with full global illumination. If you just do RayGL fast, it's just going to give you a preview of the direct illumination sources within the scene. So it's not doing the GI bounce, it's not doing any sort of final gathering or what have you. You can see all the shadows are very, very dark, very, very crisp. Now we're doing kind of a ray trace preview, if you will, of your scene. This is really handy if you just need to get a quick preview. It's incredibly fast, and I mean incredibly fast in Moto 701. There we go. Let's turn it off. Great. All right. So let's bake some stuff for this object. I want to go to my shader tree, and inside my render settings, I'm going to change my frame settings here, to 1024 by 1024. Awesome. And I'm also going to change the effect of my final color to ambient occlusion, and I'll add in another render output for surface ID. Brilliant. Okay, so this is where going in and having a very, very, very discrete understanding of how you want to physically set up your texture network over in Photoshop is important, because we can, as we know from our experience, use the surface ID masking system to help us very quickly generate some really awesome masks. All right. Okay, so let me just grab all these. Put this in a material called 1. This is going to be in a material called 2. And all of these guys down here, this is going to be in a material called 3. It really doesn't matter what name you have for all these materials. You just have to have one. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and start our bake. So render, let's make sure everything's selected. Yep, the UV map selected, the items selected. Now I can bake to render outputs, and I'm on my way. I want to leave all of my ambient occlusion settings at their default, so I'm not going to increase the quality. However, I would definitely encourage you to go in and change it as you go through this process. Now, I want to spend some time for a second and talk about the ambient occlusion render output, because this AO pass is often going to give us some really interesting results. Let me zoom in to a value of 100%. More than 100%. There we go. All right. If you look very, very carefully up here at the top, we're getting some odd occlusions, some black holes, some black spots. What are these being created from?
The hinge or whatever.
Yeah, that little bracket that sits on top of the sign, right? This is something to be aware of. Any sort of occlusion that is going to be created inside the scene is going to be included inside of that ambient occlusion pass. We didn't get it as much as I thought we were going to get it in here, but that includes any sort of shadow that's being cast from the occlusion from other geometry within the scene. This is something that we're going to be careful on, especially if we have UVs for that bracket, for that wooden post that's being created at the exact same time as everything else. You may have to go in and move everything out from the center of your scene to get the illusion that you're after. All right, and these are all the chain links up here at the top. That looks good. Everything else generally looks pretty okay for the most part. I'm happy with this. We're getting some errors down here, some funkiness. Yeah, I might want to go back in and revisit that, but overall, I think it's okay. Some of these little errors we can paint out. Sometimes when you have problems in your AO map, it's not the end of the world, because what you're generating is just a black and white map. That's all you're getting. So if you need to go in and fix it with the painting tools inside of Photoshop, you absolutely can. What you see is not necessarily what we're forced to work with. You can always go in and continue the image editing process to yield the result that we're after. All right. Let's just do a quick spot check of our alpha. Yep, there it is. Things look good. And then there's our surface ID. All right, rock and roll. Things are looking exactly the way I want them to look. So let's save the image. Excuse me, I'm going to save a layered image. And on my desktop, I'm going to call this signed baked assets. Go. Awesome. And I'm also going to export out my UV map. All right. Now, let's go hang out in Photoshop. Yeah. something funky has happened with my gradebook, and I don't know what's going on. I did the gradebook for GCOM 402 a couple weeks ago, and I discovered last Friday that it's not showing up on your site, and I don't know what's going on. So I'm aware of it. If you need to know immediately what your grade is, just come find me after class or during a break. I'll be more than happy to give you a hand. Yeah, but that's a known factor, and I'm actively working on resolving that. I think there's a bug or a glitch in D2L that's nuking it, so I just gotta figure it out. I apologize. All right. Let me open up some of those things that I just created. I want to start with the baked assets. There we go. And I'm also going to open up those UVs. All right. Now, Photoshop is going to want me to rasterize this EPS. So let's just change the unit of measurement here to pixels. And 1024, RGB, this we know, rock and roll. And now we're ready to start working on this. Okay. I want to take the layer 1 from my Sign UV's EPS file and shift drag it over into my baked assets file to combine all those elements. And now that we have the basic underlying structure for our entire Photoshop document created, let's save out a new version. And I can't recommend you do this enough. You have to save out a new version and start establishing the naming conventions that's going to give you the foundation for this entire texturing process. So I'm going to call this Sign. That's the most general description of this project. This is the texture file, so I want to add TEX. And I'm also going to initially start working on the diffuse values for this. We're going to separate the diffuse maps from the bump maps here in a minute. But I like to include it in the file name, and then absolutely a version number. You got to have version numbers. It's critical. All right. So let's start rocking and rolling. Last week we started talking a lot about the texturing setup, and I want to continue to reinforce this process because it is really, really important. The more you do now in the early stages of the texture, the more successful you're going to be at the end of your texturing stage. So don't overlook this all critical step. We have to ensure that this is a muscle that we build now. You know, this is like going to the gym. It really is. I hate going to the gym, okay? It is my least favorite thing to do on the face of the entire planet. I loathe it, right? But I gotta do it, right? I can think of probably a dozen different things just instantly that I'd much rather be doing than sitting there doing this, okay? I don't like doing this. This is stupid. It's a waste of my time, okay? But I gotta do it, right? Because if I don't go to the gym, I'm gonna be like Jabba the Hutt because Pat likes some Taco Bell. I really do, okay? It's amazing. I don't know what they put in Taco Bell, but those chalupas are like my Achilles heel, all right? And for whatever, I don't know if you guys experience this, but the Mountain Dew at Taco Bell is like 10,000 times better than the Mountain Dew that you get in the bottles. I don't know why it is. It just is, okay? Huh? Oh, man. Well, anyways. This is like going to the gym. We have to do this texture setup, and we have to get good at it, and we just have to go through the repetition to ensure that we create it into muscle memory. So walk me through the steps that we need to go through to set up our diffuse texture map correctly and in a fashion that gives us the most flexibility going forward.
You want to make an alpha channel for, or not an alpha channel, but a channel for every different color in your service ID output.
Yeah, I love it, and I think maybe
change your ambient occlusion and multiply.
You got it. Let's start with the surface ID. I think this is a good place to naturally start. I'm going to solo just this one layer, and here's a great trick. If you hold down the Option key and click on the little icon, the visibility icon, it will solo that layer. It'll turn everything else off. Good trick. Okay. I start here because this is the foundation that I initially want to begin with. Okay. And so there's a couple things in here that we can do pretty quickly. I want to use these colors as the generation of a selection. So let me go grab my magic wand tool. And I'm going to start selecting some pixels here. There we go. I love it. And what are we going to do with this selection? Yeah.
We're going to expand it by one because the color isn't perfectly to the edges of itself. You know, like the color fades a little bit at the edge. So
yeah.
You're not going to pick it all up when you do that. When you do the magic wand.
I love it. Okay. And you're absolutely right. We're going to come back to that in a minute, but you're absolutely right. We are going to do that. But initially, how are we going to use this selection?
I would go over to the channels tab.
But what are we going to make with it? We're going to make a mask. We're making masks, okay? That's what we're using the Surface ID render output for, is to help us generate a transparency mask quickly with just a couple mouse clicks, okay? I personally, and this is something that I do on all my projects, I group all of the elements that I'm going to use on certain portions in a folder, okay? That way I can very easily organize my layers palette. If you don't do this, your layers palette is going to turn into just kind of a nightmare. There's going to be hundreds of layers, and without a folder system to help you organize things, it's just going to be impossible to work within. All right, so I'm going to create a group, which is a little folder. Go away, Doc. That folder icon, okay? And let's call this group, let's just call it sign. And with my selection still active, I can click on the Create Layer Mask button, which is this one, that guy right there, and create a layer mask for the folder. Boom. Awesome. Now, whatever I put inside that folder is immediately going to get masked out. Okay? I love it. Now we can very quickly add new elements into the mix without having to worry about its effect on the larger construct of our scene. I love it. Okay, let's keep cruising. And now this should go pretty quickly. Okay, let's just grab that one. I'll make a new folder. Let's name it. This is going to be, I think these are the chain links. Name your folders, chain links, and then we'll mask it with the selection. And then last but not least, I'll grab these yellow guys with the magic wand tool, make a folder, and mask it. I forgot to name it. Bad Pat. And these are the brackets. Okay, good. We're done with the Surface ID. Do we need this layer anymore? No. You're free to delete it. Okay? You're free to delete it. I often do. As soon as I make all the folders, I'm good. I'm done. I no longer need it. Okay? Now, what's step number 2? We've used the Surface ID to create a whole series of layer masks for some folders. What's next?
I would say, okay, it may not be next, but to put the ambient occlusion on top, change to multiply, and make it, remove the alpha channel, make it a channel and not
A layer.
Or,
I love it. Let's do that. I think that's a good next step, is to work with the ambient occlusion. Now, right now, we don't have anything else within our scene, so changing the mode to multiply isn't really going to do anything. But momentarily, it is. Once we start putting new layers and putting some colors in each one of our folders, life is good. Then that ambient occlusion map, or excuse me, that ambient occlusion layer is going to play a much more active role. Before we get to that, though, do we want the black background in our ambient occlusion? No. Okay, and this is the third step. We've got to make an alpha channel, a transparency selection from our alpha output. Now notice that I've turned off the visibility of everything except alpha output. It's the only thing active within our scene. Now I can go over to my Channels tab, which is right next to Layers in the Essentials workspace, and hold down the Command key and click on any one of the RGB thumbnails, and it will load that outline, that alpha layer, as a selection. And once again, we can use this selection as a layer mask. Specifically, we're going to be masking out our ambient occlusion to get rid of, oops, wrong button, to get rid of that black background, and mission accomplished. This is what we should end up with when we're done. Okay? Finito. All right, let's start throwing in a couple colors into our folders and test our texture before we get too much further, okay? So I'm going to work with some solid colors. Now I have the folder called Sign selected. So if I go into the yin and the yang sign down here at the bottom, I can very easily create a solid color. And it doesn't matter what these colors are initially. Okay, it might help if I turned on my sign. There we go. Doesn't matter what these are colored initially, because the whole idea behind working with solid colors is that we can very instantly and easily go back in and change these colors whenever we want. It's non-destructive. We're not physically baking in the color to a specific pixel. The entire layer is being flooded with the exact same color and then is being masked off at the group level. Just to make my life easier, I'm going to duplicate that solid color 2 more times. And I'll pick a lovely shade of red, perhaps. And I'll put that shade of red in my chain links folder. And then this third one, I'll make it a lovely shade of green and put it inside my brackets folder. Okay. Now, what we're trying to do here is to create a whole series of very bright, very vibrant colors that will allow us to test the setup of our texture back over in Modo. Okay. Because before we go any further, we got to make sure that the masks that we've created are working the way we need them to work, okay? Because we're about to invest about 10 to 12 hours of painting on this bad boy. I don't want you guys to find mistakes later on that will force you to go back to an earlier version of your project and start over, okay? This is the most important part of the texture setup phase, is the application of this raw texture back on our model.
Okay, so when I made my dumpster model,
Mm-hmm.
I made like one little small mistake where I did not place a verdant polygon on the UV, and it's really not. I know it's really not the way you're supposed to do it, but it is possible to place that in a certain place on your UV map in such a way that it looks right, and you can, if you have the texture loaded, you can move it around the UV map and see where that is.
Yes.
It's kind of corner though.
Okay. Was there a question in there, or was there a comment? Just a comment. Okay. All right. Much better to do it this way. Absolutely. Okay, so let's test the model, or test the texture back on our image, or on our model over here. So load in that image map. Mine's on my desktop. It's called Sign. It's a PNG. I like the PNG file format. It's just me, okay? I would encourage you to find a file format that works for you. And this is what we're after. This is what we're trying to look for. If you look very, very carefully here, we have little seams, we have little openings inside all the different areas on our UVs. These we need to fix before we go any further, okay? Seams are part of the texturing pipeline, okay? You can't avoid seams. However, we can massage them a little bit to make sure they're not as noticeable. At the very least, we got to get rid of all those openings so we don't see through the texture to the underlying material inside of Modo. Over in Unity, believe it or not, this is going to show up as kind of a really bright, vibrant purple, okay? We don't want this, okay? Clearly, we don't want our little medieval sign to be purple underneath in very small areas. And you can see it on the brackets too, little openings. And Mr. Ballas was absolutely right. That's entirely being driven by the fact that our layer mask is 1 pixel too small. We can extend it just by extending our layer mask instantly over in Photoshop and fixing this problem. Let's just do it real fast. Let's jump back over into Photoshop. And let's start with the sign. And how do I do this? Walk me through the process of extending that layer mask by 1 pixel.
You would just select it.
Yeah, how do you select it?
Control and click on it.
Yeah. Here on the Mac, it's going to be the Command key. At home on PCs, it's going to be Control. Notice that once I hold my Command key down, my cursor changes to include the little marching ants selection box. Now I can just click on it, and it automatically selects the pixels that that layer mask is responsible for working with.
You go to select.
Select.
Modify, expand.
You got it.
You enter 1 pixel around and see how it looks.
All right. Now, all we have...
Paint white back in.
You got it.
The selection.
Yeah, we've made our outline 1 pixel bigger, but we haven't actually done anything to our mask yet, right? We've just made the selection bigger. We haven't made the mask bigger. So this is the step that people often forget to do. We have to fill our selection with white. So if I go Edit, Fill, we're going to use white, hit OK. Then we'll deselect it, and life is good. Back to work. I'm going to do the exact same thing for all three of these. Select it. Select, modify, expand by 1 pixel. Then we'll fill that area with white. Can't forget our brackets. Select, expand by 1 pixel. Then we'll fill it with white. Oops, excuse me. I was on the wrong layer. Forgot to select the appropriate layer mask. Let's save as one more time. Let's replace the file that's currently associated with our model file. Jump back over to Modo, and boom. Yeah, there it is. All those little problems have gone away. Now we're getting some interesting banding here. Interesting, huh? Can you see that on our bracket? Do we necessarily care about this?
What is that?
That's part of the ambient occlusion. I'm seeing those little bands that are kind of going,
Okay, yeah.
you know, back along the z-axis. These little bands here. These little guys right in here. Do we necessarily care about them? Yeah, it's incredibly tiny, right? So we could go back in and fix these, right? We could if we wanted to. Here's my suggestion. When you see little issues with the ambient occlusion pass, like you see here, go through the rest of the texturing stage. Put a basic photograph in there. Start to texture this as you would. Sometimes these, what could be easily seen as a mistake, can give you the illusion of dirt and grime accumulation that could add a little something. So don't use what you see here in its raw initial form as the impetus for an edit. It might add something to your texture along the line. Okay? I'm going to leave them in. And I think more importantly, you know, the gamer is never going to be that close to our bracket. So do I care about it? The larger scheme of things? No. You know, this is the way my gamer is going to be looking at this texture for the majority of it. So we can get away with murder here. We don't necessarily have to go back in and look at it. And chances are he's going to be looking at the sign from the underside and at the top. He's never going to see those details of the bracket, right? Whenever you're going through anything texturing-wise, always conceptualize how the gamer is going to be interfacing with this texture and use that decision to help you out, okay? Or that answer to that question to help you out. All right, life is good. This we know. This is what we explored last week. So let's start working with some photographs and start very quickly outlining how we can use these photographs to create the illusion of our scene. All right. Let's do the sign here, and I'm going to open up some wood textures here. These are all textures that I downloaded either through CG Textures or from a number of different places. You're going to find that you want to have a rather large library of textures. It's going to help. Now you got to make some decisions here on how you want to physically build your entire texture for it. What type of wood is this going to be created from? I always look for wood grain patterns that have a lot of character in them. Something like this is very interesting to me because you can see that the total value as across the entire texture has some variations in it. We have some light areas and some dark areas. We get some freebies as far as character moments inside the textures. Those are kind of attractive to me. But at times, we can use stock, kind of raw wood textures to get what we want. I'm just looking for character moments here. Now, I think for something like this, for our little shop sign, I'm going to build my own from some existing textures. No. These are wood ends. Yeah, there's some good ones in here. There's some good ones. Well, let's see. I don't know. I'm being indecisive at the moment, so I'm just going to experiment around with some different ideas. Luckily for us, one of the cool things about working inside of Photoshop is that the creative process isn't truncated by the workflow in Photoshop. We're free to go in and continue to explore how all this is going to be working together. whenever I'm designing anything, and it doesn't matter if it's in Photoshop or in Modo or whatever, I always try to get into the mindset of the original artisan that created this object. If I was a woodworker and I was tasked with creating a little shop sign, how would I physically create that object in the real world? Believe it or not, knowing a little bit about carpentry, knowing a little bit about metalwork and automotive repair goes a long, long way in the 3D world, because we want to imprint those ideas on the textures and the models that we create. Let's see. I think I'm going to use this one. That's a good little texture file to begin with. And let's do this. I want to take that bad boy, and I'm just going to throw it in. Yeah, there we go. Aha. Okay, looking good. Looking good. Now, one thing that we also have to do is we have to maybe do some transforming here to make sure that the size of this matches the overall pattern that we want. Something like that. All right. Now, for me, I think this wooden sign, in my mind, is really has really been created out of a whole series of separate boards. Okay, this isn't one piece. Okay, we want to make sure that we get the illusion of small little gaps in seam between these little wooden planks, much like we did for our wooden crate. Okay, there are a number of different ways we can do that. When we were talking with the crate project a couple weeks ago, we talked about physically modeling it and then baking out AO detail. Well, I think we're going to take that one step further. Today's conversation is really revolving around painting. So we're going to use some of these base textures and then paint in this detail and paint in this illusion with our brush system. Okay? Brushes are the way to add custom detail in the areas that we need them to get the illusions that we're after. So let's do this. I'm going to make this full screen and just zoom in here a little bit. And yeah, I like that. I want to duplicate this object. Move it over. Now that very easily and very obviously looks like a clone of its neighbor, so I want to rotate it 180 degrees and then maybe move it up and down a little bit. Give it some variation. Looks good. I'll make another one. Command-J is the keyboard shortcut for duplicating things, by the way. All right, you know what I should do? Let's turn on our UVs just so I can see what my UVs look like too. Sometimes the wireframe gives you a really great example of where you should be putting these elements. Let's make it a really bright, vibrant purple. There we go. All right. Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Okay, good. I think I'm happy with that, just for the time being. And let's go ahead and do the back as well. Now the back I don't care so much about, so I'm just going to duplicate this object a couple different times. Then we're on our way. Okay, great. There it is, although I will vary it a little bit. Just to make it look a little bit more organic than it actually is. Yeah, that'll do. Okay. Good, good. Now we're starting to flush it out. Yes, sir.
There's like, those three boards seem like they're exactly the same.
They are exactly the same. Yeah, and that brings up a really good point. You know, that's the kind of the next level of detail that we want to work at here. We've been using one picture to establish a number of different boards. But visually, they all look kind of the same, right? Because, well, they are the same. How can we go in and make each one of these maybe slightly unique? Yeah?
You could use the clone stamp tool to remove some of the different cuts in the wood, some of the different darkness in the wood.
Okay. I like it. That's a great idea. Before we go too much further, though, let's kind of define the separation of all the boards, so that way visually we can see where the boards begin and end, okay? I always try to paint and pass it, right? We've done the first general pass. Now we want to go in and start establishing the next level of detail, which is the individual separation of the boards. Now to do this, I want to do all of this on a new layer, right? Herein lies the power of the Photoshop layering system, is that I can have a crazy number of layers in one folder that's all being masked out and just work very, very quickly, okay? And know that I can go back at any moment and change the things that I want to change. Okay, so let's make some decisions here, and I want to turn on my UVs just to kind of get my bearings here. You know what? Let's just make some decisions. Let me grab my brushes, okay? There's my brush. Let's open up our brush palette here. Maybe find a good brush that we could use. I think I want to use some sort of grunge brush here, only to get just a little bit of noise inside of this layer. Whoa, that may be a little too big. How about this one? What's this one going to look like? Yeah, that's not so bad. If I change the color to something like black. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this one step further. I want to make a new solid color layer, and then I'll make it black, and I'll invert the mask by doing Command-I, and then with my little brushes here, I can go in, oops, and paint with white on the mask, and very quickly establish where I want all these boards to go. Yeah.
So,
Oops.
since this is like a sign, presumably made out of the same boards on both sides, is there like, do you just eyeball it to try and make it line up?
You could, if you wanted to,
But
yeah.
Is there an easier way?
I think the easiest way, if you really wanted the board pattern on the front to be identical to the board pattern on the back, instead of having them stacked horizontally, have them stacked vertically. That way, when you draw a line with your paintbrush, just draw it straight down, and you'll get both at the same time. That'd be the only way to really get accuracy. For me, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. You know, I don't think the gamer is really going to be looking at the back of the board, the back of the sign, and then the front of the sign, and go, hey, wait a minute. Things don't necessarily match up. No one's going to see that, so I don't think I'm going to really spend a lot of time. Yeah, I know. Some gamers are like that, and they like to find the errors and the mistakes, okay? Now, this is kind of the really big advantage, and I have some work that I still have to do here. But this is, herein lies kind of one of the big advantages of working, working inside of Photoshop, okay? Is that I can create this illusion pretty quickly, and then go back in and adjust it. Like, I certainly don't like it having black, being, you know, all these board lines being black. So what if I change the blend mode to like overlay? Now it's a dark, dark brown. Just that one change instantly has changed the effect of how my paint strokes are going to show up on the board itself. Now, one of the things that I've learned from my experience inside of painting is that whenever you're trying to create the illusion of gaps, there's got to be like 1 pixel line inside your texture file that's pure darkness, okay? We want the edges to be a little bit grimy as I've created here, but we've got to have one row be completely black and solid to create the illusion that there's some point within inside the boards where the light isn't reaching. So let me do that. I'm going to go back to my brushes here, and I think I'm just going to use a standard brush. I'll use one of these guys, perhaps. Let's paint on my layer mask. Yep, that'll work, but I'm going to make it much smaller. Yeah, that may be a little too big. Make it a little bit smaller. Yeah. Oops. I'm holding down the shift key, by the way, as I drag down. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. That's a great suggestion. There's a, yeah, inside of our toolbar over here, of course we have the marquee selection tool. But if you look at it, we also have a single row marquee selection tool. So if you really wanted to be absolutely laser focused, go crazy. Yeah, horizontal and vertical. I think I'm just going to use brushes. And now with that one little row of pure black pixels in there, now we're starting to get the illusion, just the smallest suggestion that there's some individual discrete boards in here that are working with us, okay? This is a way of starting to go in and break this out. But I want to show you something else that's equally as powerful. If this was the real world, would all these boards be the exact same brightness? Imagine in your mind you're looking at a gigantic picket fence outside your home, perhaps. Each one of the boards on that picket fence is, they're going to be different brightness values, right? One's going to be really dark. The board next to it's going to be a little bit lighter. The next to that one's going to be maybe even more darker than its neighbor. So we want to be able to go in and adjust the brightness of all of these, okay? Unless, even then, there's going to be small little variations in tonal value, as they call, within inside of the object that suggests individual boards, okay? I do this a lot, and I love working with adjustment layers. I want to be able to affect everything inside of my folder here kind of globally, all right? So check this action out. This is actually really neat. I want to create one layer that determines, if you will, the intensity of certain areas within inside of my my little shop sign here. So I want to introduce to you guys a really cool concept called adjustment layers. Adjustment layers are going to allow us to do a number of different things, but they're a global operator. Anything that's below an adjustment layer inside of your layers palette is going to be affected by that adjustment layer. Yeah?
If you place an adjustment layer in a group, will it only affect things in that group?
Absolutely, for sure, for sure. Anything that's in that folder is only going to be influenced by that adjustment layer. Absolutely. I'm sorry, say again? Correct, correct. It's a great way for us to focus the role of an adjustment layer inside of our hierarchy. So adjustment layers can be found down here at the bottom. It's in that yin and yang symbol in your layers palette. And these guys here in the center are the adjustments. Okay. Well, actually, a number of these are adjustments. These are all adjustment layers. Okay. And we have some really fun ones in here. I think I'm going to start off with, I don't know. Let's just do hue saturation. Okay. I think that's a fun one to work with. Hue saturation. Okay. Now notice the position of that adjustment layer. It's at the top of our folder hierarchy here. When you add an adjustment layer, you'll get this little properties panel. Here are the hues that we can adjust. Okay. You can see that as I change my hue slider, the colors are globally changing inside of that. The red and the green are staying where they are. Great way for us to globally tint things, which is pretty neat. We can also colorize, which is going to take the saturation values of that object and create a different effect for us. So that's kind of neat. I don't know if I really want to colorize all this. I want to put this back to 0, kind of reset everything. Because I like all these different shades of brown that we got going on here. But I do want to affect the lightness and the darkness of some of these. Okay? Or maybe just the saturation and desaturation. That may be the way we want to work with. Okay? Ultimately, the system that we're going to be working with here gives us the flexibility that we need. Let's make it a really obvious change. I'm going to change the hue to something like purple, just so you can see what's going on. And notice that when we create it, we get a layer mask, okay? I like working with layer masks, because if you haven't noticed already, because it allows me to work non-destructively. It allows me to continue to kind of leverage the flexibility that I need to very, very quickly go in and work with the elements that I need to work with. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to invert my, my layer mask once again, and I'm going to activate the marquee selection tool. Now, I'm using the marquee selection tool because I want to select kind of big swaths of pixels here. And I want to flood those swaths of pixels. Let's transform this with a color. There we go. So inside of my layer mask, I'm going to fill this with a, I don't know, let's just do 50% gray. There we go. And notice that now we're getting 50% of the effect that our adjustment layer is transitioning within. We'll do that again. Use marquee selection. Something perhaps like that. I love it. There we go. That's looking pretty great. And this time I want to fill it once more. And let's just use a color. And let's make it something a little bit darker. Yeah, and check it out. Now we're not getting as much intensity here on that board. It's starting to get that tonal value that we're after. Okay? Some boards are very pink. Some boards aren't very pink, and that's what we're after. Okay. Now, clearly, we're not going to be doing pink here, but this is just an example of what we can do. I tried to make the color as obvious as I could. And let's just do it. Once again, we'll do color. Oops, excuse me. I didn't want to use the same color, excuse me. And let's pick white on this one. Oops, I lost my selection, I apologize. Now, I already have one of these boards selected. This is actually kind of cool. If you hold down the Option key, you'll see the layer mask. There it is. You can continue to use your magic wand here to very quickly go in and select portions of that, which is kind of nice. And then fill it a different color. Let's maybe fill that one with white. Awesome. And then we're just creating the illusion of different boards with an adjustment layer. Now that one's totally pink. So maybe that's not the illusion that we're after here. Maybe this one needs to be filled with, oh, I don't know, something like that. A little bit lighter. Yeah, go ahead. We're masking with gray values. Think of gray values like intensity, right? Because we're just toggling the intensity of this adjustment layer.
So you would need multiple adjustment layers if you wanted to affect the color differently in a different board or something.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If you wanted each board to be a different color, then the result that we'd have to create would be a little bit different. Let's just kind of flesh this out. And I'm just picking random colors here. Okay. Oops. Something like that. We can maybe transform our selection. Make it a little bit wider on this one. There we go. And last but certainly not least, let's just do another one, another color. Make this one much darker. Yeah, all right. So now we're getting the illusion of slightly different boards, okay? If we go back to our adjustment layer, check it out. Now I'm globally changing the values, and I'm not having to go back in and adjust how each one of those boards is looking, okay? So if I wanted a different color, I could very quickly go in and say, hey, different color, you know, with the hue values. Or, and I think this is where I'm going, I think I'm just going to start to evaluate the saturation. Yeah, or I could go the opposite direction, make it really saturated, where some are brighter than others. Or I can do a combination of it. I can make some desaturated, maybe increase the lightness or the darkness a little bit. It's subtle, but it's important. It really is. Here's with it on, here's with it off. You can see as I click back and forth that some boards are popping out more than others. If I continue to refine this a little bit, let's leave that kind of right around 0. I'll just really mess around with saturation here. Yeah, interesting. I like that. Food for thought. There are many, many, many different ways of approaching how to create the separation of all these boards inside of Photoshop. It's a small, subtle little effect. Clearly, one is not black, and the next one next to the board next to it's white. But there are changes in tonal value as you go across the entirety of our sign. Really successful, I find. Very successful. Working globally. Working globally. I mentioned earlier that adjustment layers work in a system that they're going to affect everything below it. So notice the location of my adjustment layer. If I was to move that adjustment layer below, oh, let's say if I put it down here, let's get it into the area of the sign that's only, yeah. Now the adjustment layer is only affecting that board over there and that board in the center. These other boards are not being influenced at all by the adjustment layer based purely on its location within the scene. All right, I like working with adjustment layers. I find them a lot of fun. All right. Last week, we spent some time talking a little bit about how to work with the paint bucket tool. Now, I want to revisit this because this is an important, critical idea. One that I think is something important that you guys really make a part of your texturing pipeline. the paint bucket allows us to fill colors in large areas. However, if we use a special combination of options with the paint bucket tool, we can very quickly add detail where we want it. Specifically, I want like the frame, the borders of my frame to be a different paint color than the interior of my shop sign. So in the big area on the center, I want to leave that as is. I want to leave this as is, but I want this in here to maybe be a lovely shade of green, and then this color, this one in here, to be a lovely shade of blue. Okay? Awesome, right? We can do this. We can do this pretty easily.
So,
yeah.
You don't have the end segments of your board like fairly fine.
No, I don't. And you're talking about this up in here. Yeah. You absolutely, and I would encourage you to do that. Mask it. Yeah, mask it out. Right. All right. So let's go ahead and start working with these colors. Okay. Now, not everything inside of Photoshop needs to generate a baked alpha mask. Okay. There are ways for us to go in and create masks quickly inside of Photoshop without having to rely exclusively on a selection system that's already in place. I need to select this little strip here, and then this little strip out over there. Okay. So check it out. Over inside of your toolbar, of course we have the marquee selection, which will allow us to drag out boxes, but we don't have a box, right? We have a very custom shape. So check it out. This jobber right here, I love this one. This is the polygonal lasso tool. I love the polygonal lasso tool. I use this one more than most. And the polygonal lasso tool allows us to go in and very quickly define a selection based on what we're clicking. Now we have to be very aware of what we're clicking. With the polygonal lasso tool, it's only going to generate straight lines, so be careful with it, okay? And certainly don't double click on accident because as you can see, it's going to close that shape for us. Not exactly what I want. Huh? You can't undo that, so don't double click. You got to be aware of what you're doing. Yeah, so be very, very careful. Now, what would be the easy way of doing this? If you don't want to click 1,000 times and paint a mask, how could you change this? Yes, Magic Wand is a great alternative in this case. Okay, let's check it out because we already have all of this masking information inside of our alpha output. Let me turn off my ambient occlusion. Check it out. We already got this mask stuff going on, or this. We already have this area of our texture map defined in our alpha. We can just continue to reuse that. So I grab my alpha, just grab that one piece, boom, rock and roll. Now I'm ready to go. Let's go back over here into my sign layer, and I'm going to create a new color. There it is. Fantastic. And that's sitting at the top. We'll do the same thing once more for that outside bit. There it is. Create a new solid from that. I'll just make it blue. And I'll put it in my sign folder, kind of at the top. There we go. I'll turn off my alpha. All right. So this is what I have so far. Not looking super hot though, right? Because clearly we don't see any of the underlying wood texture below it. This is bad. This is horrible. It doesn't look real. How can we fix it? How do we chip paint off?
Okay, that's a different question.
That's a different question. Okay, I like it. How do I chip paint off? Yeah.
You can put a layer of the wood, which is already underneath, but you can use the white or the black brush on the mask.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. We have a little bit of a challenge, though, don't we? Yeah.
The challenge would be that depending on how you use what brush you use, like it's going to look transparent in places, which you wouldn't have with paint.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't use transparency, right? This is the big challenge when creating weathering effects, when things chip and kind of get scratched off. We have to either use brushes that have very, very hard edges, okay, or use photographs, and that's what we're going to use, okay? Because a lot of this organic detail and this organic noise comes for free inside of a photograph. As long as you're confident and comfortable with the selection system inside of Photoshop, you can do it quickly. Now, I'm going to revise my structure of this over here. Because right now, each one of these guys, this solid color, is being masked by a very specific shape. Although it's not difficult for me to continue to go in and refine this, it would be easier if I had maybe two subfolders, a compound mask, as they call. So check it out. I'm going to select that bad boy. Make sure it's actually selected. I'm going to select it. There we go. And I'm going to create a folder. And then I want to mask that folder with my selection. Now, I don't need this guy anymore. So I want to fill it entirely with black. Fill with black. There we go. That's what we're after. Wonderful. We'll do the exact same thing for the blue one on the outline. I'll select it, create a folder, mask that folder, and then I want to fill that entire layer mask with black. All right. And then I'll put each one of these solid colors in their own respective folders. Because what we're trying to get here is a compound mask, much like we're working with a compound mask up here at the group level for the entire shop sign area. We have one folder that's defining the area that we want to work in with this mask, and then we have a solid color on the inside of that that will allow us to very quickly go in and establish where we want this blue paint to appear. So with that done, let's do the blue one first, which is the outside. Let's go grab the paint bucket, and here's the magic option that people forget, all layers. This is going to analyze the intensity of the pixel that I click on in any visible layer. Yeah. If we increase the tolerance here a little bit, we'll grab a wider area. Yeah, there we go. Interesting. I like how this one over there is turning out. Yeah, pretty cool. Now, this is something that you clearly want to go through and continue to refine. This isn't perfect in any sense, but we're getting there, right? We're getting there. Now it's starting to look as though the paint and the wood surface it's painted on is a little bit more integrated. We still have some work that we need to be done here, but we're getting there. Yeah.
I found a lot of really good textures of like things that look chip on CG textures.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that if you wanted to, you could probably put into that folder like a layer with one of those decals and then change to multiply or overlay.
I like it. That's a great idea.
It would add some detail to your chips.
It would. I think, one of the things that we have to be very, very aware of, especially when working with wood grains, is the grain itself, the underlying grain pattern. I want to be able to see that grain start to shine through inside this blue area. We're starting to get a little bit of it. If I turn off my blue, I want to see all this lovely grain detail in there, okay? And I need that to come through into the painted section of my texture. And let me show you a really great trick. I'm going to go through and I'm going to turn off a number of things. I'm going to get rid of that in there. I'll leave that on actually. And then here it is. Get rid of all of my paint lines. All right. So I'm basically going to turn everything except the wood grain layer off. If I go over to my Channels tab, check it out. Now I have individual channels here that describe, there it is, the colors of my object. Now I'm going to go through and color pick the ones that have the most contrast, and in this particular case it's the blue. There's not a lot of blue pixels inside of red, kind of tannish wood, so that makes sense. And I'm going to make a copy of it. So left click and drag it into this button over here. And with that copy, I can maybe do a levels call on it, Command L, and make it really contrasty. Because what I'm after here is just the small little illusion of grain. I want to get all these black pixels in here, or all the grain as black as I can, because then I'm going to use that as an addition to my mask. Okay. Hold down the Command key, click on that blue copy. I can go back over into here. Let me make sure that RGB is turned on. Can go back over into the layer that's responsible for driving my blue, okay? And I can use that as a mask for, or as an addition to the mask here. And I want to use that selection to fill some black. Deselect it, yeah, that looks a whole lot better. Now it looks like the paint is stained precisely where all the grain was, okay? Again, we're just using, yeah, now it looks like all the paint is in the deepest parts of the crack and it's starting to look a little bit more integrated, okay? Using these secondary channels, or excuse me, using these color channels over here in your channels tab to help define areas within your scene goes a long, long, long way, okay? It's awesome. All right, let's do it one more time, just so everyone can see what's going on. Because we got the blue one down, let's do the red one. Here's the red one. Let's just call this blue paint. Red paint, all right. So I need to create a layer mask for our red paint. Right now the layer mask is black, so we're not seeing any red. Let's do this. I'm going to go back in. Here's that layer that I just created. What if I grab a different one of these and make a copy of a different color channel? We'll get a different effect. Let's make a copy of the red channel. Let's increase its tonal value by doing a levels call, Command L. And let's crunch the values quite significantly. I want to make it look a little bit different, which is why I'm using a different channel here. Yeah, something like that. That looks pretty good. Remember, what I'm after here is just really dark pixels in the grain. Hold down the Command key to make a selection of that. I'll go back to my Layers tab and back to the layer mask that's responsible for drawing the red pixel. And this time, I'm not going to fill it with black. I want to fill it with white since my layer mask is currently empty. And now we'll see red paint where we see red paint. Now the cool thing about this process is that it's still non-destructive. I can continue to refine this by selecting my layer mask, doing another levels call, and messing around with these sliders. And we can see its effect inside of our scene. So if I wanted less red paint, I could really crunch it. If I wanted more red paint, I could increase the whites. Do both at the same time. Shift around with the gamma to change the transitions between these white and dark values. My brain is telling me that I want more black or I want less red. Something maybe like that. That's kind of fun. Almost kind of looks like a Captain America shield. Anyone excited about the Winter Soldier? About the Winter Soldier, the next Captain America movie? I am. I like Captain America. It's one of my faves. So, all right. Looking pretty good. Looking really good, actually. Yeah.
So you wanted to add text. Could you just modify the layer mask?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I tell you what, let's take a small break, and then we'll talk about text here after the break, okay?
I was wondering, like, if there's a way to make something shiny but not rusted. That.
Yeah, we're going to get into that, for sure. Yes, the answer is yes, absolutely. Now, when it comes to the game asset itself, that's something that we want to start to mask with a texture map, a reflection map. But ultimately, that shininess value is going to be something that we get to control over in our game engine. We control it with a texture, but ultimately that parameter is something that we build in Unity. So we'll get there. We're going to talk about that this semester for sure. Okay, other questions? I saw a hand. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it says we're doing bot map.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into it. That's the next bit of this. Okay, so here's where we left off, and things are starting to look pretty good. I'm very pleased with my little texture here. It's starting to look as though this paint has that my little wood shop sign here was painted, and then over time the paint has been worn off. I like that. I like that very much. Now clearly there's a lot of detail in here that I need to go in and do, okay? I'm not going to take you through the entire texturing of this. There's additional weathering on every single level here that I need to continue to accomplish, okay? So this is about, in my mind, this is like 5% done, okay, what we have here. I mean, there's a quite a large journey in front of me to really flesh out this art asset and get it to where it needs to be, okay? But I want to spend some time continuing to talk about how we get to work with bump maps, okay? And specifically, I think our conversation about bump maps needs to happen with some additional elements on my shop sign, like some sort of logo, okay? So let's put some text on there. Or actually, you know what? I think somewhere in here I have the Design Lab logo for our department. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Or I have our school logo on here somewhere. Oh, this is going to be a nightmare because I've forgotten where I put it. GCOM branding elements. I think that's what it was called. Oh, under SEC logo, huh? I don't know, maybe just use that one. There it is, and let's see. These are all the paths. Do I have an image? I don't. Let's just open this thing up. Yeah, okay, here we go. Okay, let's just grab all these paths. I'm going to copy it. Here, I'll just drag it over here. Oops, excuse me. Apparently I lack the ability to use all of my fingers. All right, this is coming from a path, so it's a little bit more. Let's just transform all of it. Oh, it's not going to let me transform all of it. Okay, hold on a sec. I'll get there eventually. There we go. All right, and now I'm going to make let's do this. I want to make a solid color from that path. Ta-da! There's our new logo. Pretty cool. And yes, it's going to drive me crazy if it's not centered within the frame. All right, cool. All right, very pleased. Now, this is the logo that's going to go on our little blacksmith shop sign, right? Doesn't necessarily look integrated into the shop sign itself. Problem. Big problem. Okay? So, we can use that same technique that we were working with earlier to help drive the illusion of this little logo being infused into the shop sign below it. So I want to use the native pixel colors of all that wood grain to mask out the areas that this logo is going to be kind of painted on my shop sign. So I want to turn it off. Turn it off and shoot. I'm going to recycle one of these guys. I think I'm just going to recycle this blue copy. Hold down the command key to click on the layer, and then I can go in. Hello. Poke around, please do. Of course. Do you need any help? No. That's our animation camera. Our old school Disney animation camera. Hi, Amanda. How are you? That's quite okay. You have big wigs coming. Okay. So you're trying to pick and find classrooms. You try find tour spots. Nice rooms. I'm not sure if this room is nice. Fancy computer. We can clean it up if you'd like. Yeah, if you got T100, I think is probably a really great representative classroom of GCOM. Yeah, because it's got a lot of artwork. Huh? Your office? Yeah, of course, no problem. Thanks. See you later. Okay, so let's go back and where were we? I think we were talking about masking our logo. And yes, that completely threw me off my game. So let me, there it is. Okay. Pretty cool. Already, just within that one mouse click, it looks like the wood grain pattern has had an influence on the weathering of our logo. Yeah.
Say you wanted to make that logo look as though it had been engraved into the wood.
Like engraved, it's not painted, so like actually kind of like carved in. Yeah. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Ooh, I'd have to experiment around with that. I think that's going to be a number of different effects. Yeah, there's that embossing effect as well. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Not impossible, but it would take some engineering. Yeah.
Okay. So you just have to mess with the different layer settings.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is a good default kind of diffuse color value. Okay, I like this. This is looking really good. Okay. Let's go put this back on the shop sign back in Modo and see what it looks like. Okay. Because now that we have everything kind of flushed out and finished, let's just take a gander at what it looks like. And just for sanity's sake, I'm going to turn off those other two folders just so it doesn't look crazy. Turn on my AO, save out. Desktop, there we go. Let's jump back over into Modo. Let's update it. Bam, start to look pretty cool. Starting to look like a shop sign. Woot. Okay. However, as we kind of roll across the surface, you see that OpenGL highlight that's coming in right here? That's a good indication as to how the computer is understanding relief within inside of our shot here. It doesn't really look as though it's full of little pits and valleys, right? It doesn't really feel as though the light is interacting with all the shadows that are being caused by the wood grain, right? This is amplified if we continue to go back over to our render. Yeah, looks very, very, very flat. Oh, I think someone asked earlier about how to ensure that your textures don't get washed out when you're trying to render. Okay, here's kind of a good little trick. Notice that I have my texture selected inside of my shader tree. Well, with it selected, of course, I'm going to get all of its properties, but the one thing that we want to look at is the gamma. Right now, the default gamma is set to 1.0. If we divide this value by 2.2 or by 1.8, we're going to get a more realistic reproduction of the color space of this image inside the final render. Okay? Let's just divide it. So we'll do divide by 2.2. Hit return. Yeah. Now it's not as washed out. We're basically kind of globally making things a little bit darker, okay, on the texture, and it looks much more closer to the way the texture looks inside the OpenGL viewport. Okay, kind of cool. Or in Photoshop, right? There's a reason for it, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I remember someone ranting about this in a forum post and when to use 1.8 and when to use 2.2. But honestly, I've forgotten. And I almost always use 2.2, and it seems to work pretty well for me. Yeah, I'd say experiment with it. Experiment, see what you get, you know. All right. Okay, so let's talk about how we can work and create the illusions of surface detail inside of our texture. Now, creating bump maps inside of Modo is really easy, or leveraging the bump map system inside of Modo and in Unity is really easy. before we go too much further, I think it's good to point out and remind people that this is a texture-based illusion. Okay, we're not actually creating little pits and valleys. We're creating the illusion of little pits and valleys. Right? Okay, it's an old school camera trick. In its most simple form, check it out. I can right-click on my texture file and duplicate it, or create an instance of it. That'll work too. And I want to change the effect from diffuse color. Right-click on it. I'm going to go down to simple shading or surface shading and choose bump. All right. Yeah. So we're getting a slightly different result now. Slightly different result, but you can see the machinery of the bump system coming into play, right? Ultimately, what's going on here is the computer is desaturating this image automatically for us, and it's using the black pixels to create the illusion of shadows and the white pixels inside of that grayscale image to create the illusion of peaks, okay? So the brightest parts of our image are being bumped out. The darkest parts of our image are being bumped in. The amount of this, the amount of the bumpiness is called the bump amplitude, and that's controlled entirely by the material that's assigned to those polygons. In my case, the base material. And check it out. There it is. There's bump amplitude. So if I was to increase or decrease this value, I would control the effect. Oops, I went too far. Put it down to 1 millimeter. And I think, let's make sure it's the base material that's driving this. No, I'm in the wrong material. Let's go into number 1. There we go. So here it is with just a teeny, tiny bump. Yeah, and that's starting to look a little bit more realistic. So something that we got to control, okay? Something that we got to control. Now we're going to continue to expand upon this over the next couple of weeks. We're going to make bump maps in Modo this week. And then next week, we're going to extract those bump maps and get them into a very specific format called a normal map that allows us to continue to play around with these. So this is just step numero uno, okay? The basic ideas and the structures are all the same. And in all honesty, you can actually take a bump map over into Unity and it will make a normal map for you, okay? I don't suggest, question, yeah?
What was that shortcut you used to show the assigned material?
Just right-click on the polygon in your preview window, and it'll show you what items in your shader tree are influencing that part of the mesh. Okay. Now, I don't recommend you do what I just did. Okay, because we're basically allowing the computer to go through and do a number of things automatically for us, and that's not suggested. The underlying technology is a black and white image that's affecting the peaks and the valleys of all of our image. I'd much rather like to control that in my own, you know, than have the computer automatically do it. For example, if you look at the way the logo is being bumped out, it's not being bumped out correctly. I can go on and continue to refine the effect by how I create my bump map over in Photoshop. We're going to use the native assets that we've already used in Photoshop to continue to refine all the bump effects. Remember, just by duplicating the diffuse texture map, it's taking all of those values, everything that's in the diffuse texture, and using it to bump the image, to create little peaks and valleys, including all the dirt and grime that we painted in, including all the ambient occlusion, soft shadows, okay? All the AO information is influencing how much bumpiness our object is getting, okay? Let's see if I can find a really great example here. It's kind of hard to see in the corners because we have shadows and stuff going on, but all the AO information over in here is having a direct impact on how the computer is bumping and creating little pits and grooves inside of our surface, okay? Actually, you can see what it's doing. Here's a perfect example. See all that noise on the bracket? That's the AO being bumped, okay? It's the black pixels and the white pixels inside the ambient occlusion pass being used to generate surface relief. No likey, okay? I want to control it. I want to be able to go in and tell the computer precisely which parts of the image I want it to bump and which parts of the image I don't want it to bump, okay? So, back to Photoshop. Back to Photoshop. Now we're going to make a brand new image here. But we're going to use, and let me get rid of this, this guy here. There it is. Things go back. Beautiful. Now we're going to use the structure that we've already created. We always want to start with a diffuse texture map, okay? That's it. Diffuse texture map first, because then everything stems from the illusion that we've already created. So I want to do a file save as now and create a brand new Photoshop document. Brand new. We're basically duplicating our Photoshop document. So file, save as. This time, it's not going to be diffuse, right? I want to put BMP, or not BMO, BMP for bump. Okay? BMP for bump version 1. All right. Now we can go in and start turning things on and off. Like, for example, I don't want the ambient occlusion to be a part of any sort of bump algorithm that I'm creating. Okay? So that's gone. That's out of there. Okay? So we can actually delete that part of our bump map. We can delete our alpha output. We don't need that anymore. Okay? And let's talk specifically about the color. Now, earlier I mentioned that the bump technology is using a grayscale image to determine the peaks and the valleys, right? Is there a way that I could easily change this color image into a grayscale image, a black and white image? Yes. How do I do it? Yeah. Yeah, you could do that. Because there is under, did you say image adjustment maps? You can. I would suggest doing it with an adjustment layer. That way it's non-destructive and allows us to go back in and change the parameters of our desaturation whenever we want. Okay? So if we go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, let's just do Hue Saturation. There is a black and white. I'm going to do Hue Saturation. And notice that it gets placed at the top of the scene. And we want that because we want it to affect everything. And I'm just going to dump down the saturation. By removing all color, we're basically making this into a black and white image. Yay! Okay, looking pretty good. However, things aren't looking too hot, right? The underlying technology for bump maps, where we have black pixels, shadows. Where we have white pixels, highlights. Or black valleys, white peaks. What do you see here?
Right.
A whole lot of gray, right? We don't see a lot of black. We certainly don't see a lot of white. We need to go in and continue to refine all of these layers to get the illusion that we're after, okay? I'm going to use a levels call. I like levels. I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. So do layer, new adjustment layer, and this time we'll do levels. And let's call it levels 1. And what we're going to get over here is this groovy little histogram. This histogram shows us the distribution of pixel values across the entire image. And it's a little graph. If we look at that top section, these are all the darker pixels. These are all the white pixels, okay? This little mountain in here shows us how many dark pixels and white pixels we have inside of our area. The higher that little mountain is, or the higher the peaks are in that graph, the more pixels of that color we currently have in the image. So with that said, what type of colors do we have in our image predominantly? Mostly grays, right? Because the white is the far right, pure black is the far left, so everything in the middle is kind of varying shades of kind of a medium gray. We have a lot of medium gray, which visually makes sense from what we saw a moment ago, right? A lot of medium gray. A lot of medium gray. Well, we can fix that. I want to have pure black. This little arrow represents the pure black point within inside of our scene. If I grab that arrow and put it like to the base of the mountain, check it out. Now we're infusing dark pixels inside of my area. Rock and roll. This is what I want. Okay? Vice versa. If I grab this little white guy and move it to the base of the valley, check it out. Now we're having a whole lot of black pixels. Awesome. Or a whole bunch of white pixels. Awesome. And then we got some medium ones in there as well. The middle one will allow us to change. Basically, in my mind, it's kind of like the transition between white and black. Kind of adjusting the middle point. So you can experiment with that and find something that works for what you're trying to accomplish. Now the great thing about working with all of these black and white, or excuse me, with all of these adjustment layers is that we get to go through and continue to define what parts of our scene we want to have bumped more than others, okay? For example, maybe I want to have the illusion that my little SCC logo is bumped out, like it's embossed, okay? And I think just looking, you see, we have a lot of medium gray values in here that's I'm not liking. Well, since we're working on a duplicate of our diffuse texture, I can go in and turn some things off here, like the red paint and the blue paint. Yes, that had a big impact immediately on what I'm seeing here, and affect my scene a little bit more globally. I gotta remember where I put my SCC logo. Where is it? There it is. There's the SCC logo. Okay. I want to create the illusion that my SCC logo has been embossed. Okay. I want it to look as though it's been kind of raised up. Check this out. This is actually kind of neat. Okay. I'm going to go through and I'm going to delete this layer mask just by unlinking it and dragging it into the trash can. And now, boom, get pure white in this area. Now, this isn't what it's visually going to look like on the diffuse value. Remember, this is only bump. So we're basically saying this area in here, I want to be embossed out, okay? Kind of like a mountain. It's just going to pop out.
Uniformly.
Say again?
Making it completely white makes it
uniformly bumped out, okay? If you could go back in and add small little things in there, just as an illusion though, okay? We get this kind of control by using the duplicate of our original diffuse texture inside of Photoshop, right? Let's save out a new version here, a new PNG. Save it. There we go. And I want to import that PNG back onto my model over here in Modo. So image map, load image. Go find that bump. There it is. All right, now that's what it looks like at the moment. Okay, not exactly what I want. Let's divide it by 2.2. There we go. Now that looks a little bit more the way it's supposed to look. Awesome. And let's change the effect of this image by right-clicking on the diffuse and going down to surface shading, bump. Yeah, now we're getting a much better result. Much better result. Now, since we're not bumping that center section, it's kind of hard to see right now. But it's looking as though we're getting a clear kind of line here. We're getting the illusion of an embossed logo as though it's not being deformed and touched. Okay. You can also go in and continue to add detail that you don't necessarily see. This is kind of fun. I always like doing this. This is kind of just for giggles. What if I go in and say with a text layer, oops. There we go. Make it a little bit bigger. Subliminal messaging, it always works. I'm glad to see that at least 2 people are paying attention. But check it out. I want to make its color black. Come on. There it is. Let's save it. Or excuse me, I got to save a new version of my bump map. I'll do save as. PNG. This is looking good. Save it in the exact same location. It's going to overwrite the file inside of Modo. I'll re-import it and then check it out. Down here at the bottom, yeah, you can just barely see bumped in Pat is rad. It's in there. With the wood grain immediately surrounding, it's kind of difficult to see, but the underlying concept still works. Okay. Now, what if we want to have areas that aren't bumped, that we want to be completely left alone? We don't want to push out. We don't want to push in. Just leave it as is. What do we do?
50% gray.
50% gray. You got it. So 100% gray, is going to push pixels out or create the illusion that they're being pushed out. 100% black is going to create the illusion that things are being pushed in. 50% gray, no effect. No effect. Okay?
So let's say if you wanted to make that embossed, okay, so the engraving part where you said pattern is rad, right? If you wanted that to look like it had been carved in, like would you just change the darkness in that area?
Well, it's already pure black, so I can't make it any darker.
No, I mean not on the bump map, on the other map.
I could, yeah.
Okay.
You can do it kind of optically with the diffuse and the bump working in harmony together. Yeah, you could. Also keep in mind that the bump amplitude of the material that's on it is going to have a direct impact on the illusion that we're creating. So if I really wanted to create an illusion of something embossed, driving that value, it's going to make it a little bit more obvious. But it's a global operator. It's a global operator. Yeah.
If you felt like it, if you felt like you wanted to have very different levels of bumping on two parts of the same object, could you add multiple bump maps?
Yes, absolutely. You can add multiple bump maps. The only thing that you'll have to do is do this. As an illusion here, we'll just kind of turn all those off. And let's do this. I'm going to go add in a procedural texture, and I'm going to make just some dots. And let's go into the texture locator, and I want to use, let's just use planar along the Z. There we go. And I want to turn the horizontal and vertical repeat to reset, and make them, oops. Something kind of like that. That's good enough. All right, just as an illusion. Well, what if I wanted to have a square here in the center as well? Let's do just a checker pattern. And let's do the same thing. There it is. Make it square. Now, right now, because of the way the shader tree works, this top layer is completely occluding out the layer below it. I want to blend the layers. Okay? How would I blend things over in Photoshop? You could change the opacity level, okay? But I still want the squares to be completely black. I don't want them to be 80% gray.
You can do multiply.
Blend modes, okay? We get the exact same things here in Modo, okay? These are all just black and white images. If you go over into the Texture Layers tab, this one right here, check it out. We have blend modes, okay? What if I just multiply it? There it is, multiply. Ah! Awesome. Now I get the dots and the squares all in one. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. And then you could use this as maybe a mask, a layer mask inside of Modo to affect the bump of two different materials. Yeah. It's good times. Now we're getting into some advanced shader tree awesomeness here. Pretty cool. Other questions? Yeah.
So, say like for the chains that have been unwrapped in such a way that it's hard to tell exactly how the shape pertains to a straight line, how would you bump map something like that?
Go back over the UV island here, or the UV workspace, and physically look at the chains themselves, okay? Because they're all perfectly flat, okay? Now the process of bumping it is going to be identical, right? It's going to be identical. Maybe I don't quite understand your question. How in your mind is it different?
Maybe I didn't think it through. I guess it is similar,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's identical. I think maybe you'll have to be careful with the pattern that you choose to bump with. You got to keep in mind that we're seeing a 2D representation of a three-dimensional cylinder that's been deformed into a chain link. So that's something to keep in mind. But on that note, let's take a look. What would happen if I put a whole bunch of whole bunch of just dots in the chain links now. Don't remember which color number 2. I'm going to take my dots here, put it in this folder, change some things here. Instead of doing plain, let's do cylindrical. This is going to be a little bit, sometimes working with projection types can be a challenge. Yeah. Especially when we're working with elements that are very, very small. I went into the negative, which is never something that I would suggest. Let's try planar. Planar works. So now we can more easily see all these little guys in here. There we go. All right. And if we just change it to, so if that's the metal pattern, check it out. I mean, the bump map is still going to work. I feel as though I just showed you guys something really awesome. Given by the peanut gallery reaction. Whoa! Yeah, you know, bump maps are such an amazing part of our technology because we're creating the illusion of surface relief based on an image, based on a texture.
That's all actually a flat surface.
It's all pure flat. We actually haven't changed at all the overall size, shape, and proportion of the geometry. It's remained the same. This is just an illusion. This is, in every sense, a camera trick. It's a render camera trick. Raphael, then James.
Is the resource cost really low in the images?
Relatively. Relatively. It's not something that's extraordinarily high. Yeah, we're going to see this in action again next week and the week after. We're never going to do a model again without a bump map. Yeah.
So it's 100% lighting. It has nothing to do with the model at all.
100% lighting. It's just a camera trick. However, next week we are going to make it about the model. We're going to take this one step further next week.
And actually edit the model.
Yeah.
To reflect the bump maps.
No, I wouldn't say we're not going to reflect the bump maps, but we are going to make some changes to the geometry that's going to have an influence on the bump map.
Okay.
All right, questions. I would like you guys to incorporate and create a bump map for your homework and lab assignment this week. Okay. Yes, sir.
I got here 10 minutes late. How did you break that chain out of the cylinder?
Yeah, you know, this is. I gave you this project file, James. It's in our resources section. I gave you it, but you don't need to create it from scratch. I don't want you to model this week because I want you to focus entirely on texturing. Okay. But here, I mean, if you want to know how to make a chain link, I can show you real fast. I wouldn't do torus. Yeah, I actually kind of loathe this tool. I don't think it works the way I want it to work in my brain. So here's how I would do it, okay? Here's how I would make a chain. Believe it or not, it's a very, very simple object itself. Okay? Believe it or not, most things in my world start off with a cube, okay? Then I can take those cubes, and I can bevel them in, and create the overall dimensions of my chain link. Okay? Can bridge those two polygons there. Bridge, okay, let's try that again. Hello, computer. Bridge. Why is it not working? Because I think I bridged like 8 times in a row. If this doesn't work, bridge. Yeah. Okay. Here. I'm just going to delete them. Oh, it did bridge. It wasn't deleting the originals. That's why. There we go. All right. And then to get the shape that I'm after, just grab the corners. Yeah. Grab all the corners. Bevel them in. Okay. There's the start of it. Okay. Love it. Looking more and more like a chain link. Then you can grab that edge, that one. Bevel those guys. Now we have a pretty realistic looking chain link without too many issues. All created from a cube. Yeah, really quick, really easy. It UVs really well. For chains, for chain links, I like modeling geometry for chain links because it gives me a lot of options in the animation side of things. Because if I have geometry, then I can make rigid body connections between all those and actually have the chain wiggle in the animation engine, which is kind of attractive for me personally. But they can't geometrically be intense. Okay, cylinders are always going to give you really a lot of intense geometry. With this, pretty easy. If you don't like the overall shape, some people like to continue to customize it after the fact. Here's a great power user trick. Just slice it down the middle using loop slice. Oops. I was doing some modeling yesterday, and all of my settings are not what they should be. There we go. And you just work on one half. So if you want to go in and continue to refine the shape of this, you can move it down. You can move these guys out a little bit. So you can, maybe not quite like that. Yeah, actually, if I wanted to change the shape, I'd do this in 2 dimensions before I pulled it into 3. Yeah. Doing some vertex beveling is also really kind of nice, because then you get much smoother edges or chamfers like I was doing a moment ago. So if you wanted a peak like that, you could do it. And then just bevel it in and keep it simple. That's my attitude. Just keep it as simple as you can. Oops, forgot to join it. Those two need to be joined. Join averaged. Then you could do the bevel without crossing any polygons. Yeah. Now that I'm in 2 dimensions, making changes to this is a whole lot easier in 2 dimensions than in 3 dimensions. Changing to the overall profile, I mean. Change the slope. I mean, there's so much you can do. Right? All right, questions. Let's revisit the details of our homework in our lab, and then I'll let you guys get started. We have about an hour left in class. I want to give you a lot of time today to work on your homework and your lab assignment in class. For your homework, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be making that little blacksmith shop sign. Don't have to make the model, you just have to do the textures on it. Okay? A couple things as always: diffuse texture map painted in Photoshop, a bump map painted in Photoshop or created in Photoshop. I would like you to also generate an ambient occlusion map, an alpha map, and a surface ID. The final portfolio render is going to be a 1280 by 720 as always, the JPEG render as always. However, this time I would like you to hand in, oh, I forgot to put in your bump map. I apologize. I got to go in and do that. So, Luxology project file, your diffuse texture map, and I would also like you to submit your bump map as well, in addition to your portfolio render. So 4 things need to be included in this week's homework assignment. Okay? All 4 of those. I should be able to recreate your entire shader tree in Modo just by plugging in all these files and get, when I open up your Luxology scene project file. Okay. Let's do next week. Oh, one other thing. Next week, Game Developers Conference. Next week, James is going. If you need to carpool, yeah. If you need to carpool, Eli, you going too?
Yeah, I'm going with Dylan from the animation class.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go, but have a good time. And if you need to carpool, James and Eli probably have some space in their cars that they'd be more than willing to, to lend out.
Megabus is hella cheap.
How expensive is Megabus?
It's $2.
$2 to go from here. $2 to go from here to the city? Really?
It's cheaper than getting a ride.
If you're the first number of people, it's actually $1. If you're like
do it online.
a couple weeks in advance.
No way. I had no idea. That is ridiculous. Where does it drop you off in the city? Does anyone know?
Some random place.
Some random place? It's called Megabus. Wow.
It is pretty close.
That's-
Last time I went to San Francisco, it was pretty close to
Okay, real quick before I let you guys continue working in your lab. Sci-fi panel. We're going to do the exact same thing, sci-fi panel, okay? Exact same thing, sci-fi panel. This is supposed to be kind of an exercise that you should be able to knock out in the next hour, because I would like you to work through all the stuff that we've been talking about today over the next hour in class, okay? I think Mr. Pearson asked, does it have to be a sci-fi thing? No, it doesn't have to be. It needs to be a hard surface, okay? If you want to make it something else, go crazy with it, all right? I've given you the models, I've given you the UVs, I've given you everything that you need to be successful in this project. Have fun with it. I don't care what it looks like at the end. I'm giving you some pretty creative freedom on what it could look like. Here's a great example. They went kind of for an Egyptian kind of hieroglyphic box.
Crazy.
I love it. I love it. So carte blanche creatively to make whatever it is that you want to make. But please remember the ideas that we've talked about over the last 2 weeks when it comes to making the diffuse texture map and the bump map in your journey to create the image that you see in front of you. Okay? Questions? All right, let's get to work.